Hello again, everybody. This is Tim. I'm hiding inside from the heat outside, so I figured I got some time. I'm going to do a quick Rolemaster video. So, this is a continuation of my Rolemaster Standard Series, the Gamemaster Law Book. So, without further ado, some things that just stuck out and I think are valuable to talk about. Be careful what emotions you elicit in your games, because we don't always know a person as well as we think. Once again, knowing your group helps this. I mentioned this in the Changeling the Lost RPG review, where you're not really sure what sort of things someone has gone through. So just be careful what you bring into your games, because something that doesn't bother you might really bother someone else. And if you talk to your players, and maybe even before the session starts, maybe bring it up. This session's going to be a little crazy. It's going to, involve some of these topics. If you guys think that's not too much, maybe I'll do something else, or maybe you could set this one out, something like that. There are some Rolemaster sections of this book, but there's not very many of them. The book is divided into two sections: intangibles and tangibles. And you would think that just the intangible stuff is what I've done so far, and the tangible stuff is the stuff dealing with the Rolemaster RPG, that you really aren't going to be able to use that, but that's not the case at all. I think there are like 2 or 3 chapters that have Rolemaster specific stuff to them, but even those sections, if you divide by 5, could give you house rules to incorporate in D20 games, because it's basically D100 plus modifiers. It's very similar to the D20 mechanic, just divided by 5. That's pretty much it. So there's poisons and diseases, different sorts of damage. What's nice about Rolemaster, it has like a cascading target number system where it's not just pass or fail with diseases. You can get like a little bit of disease, or a little bit more nasty results, or all the way up until death. So depending on how you roll can affect how nasty the disease is, which I think is kind of cool. There's big lists of items, herbs, poisons, and other specific Rolemaster materials and items. Then it goes and starts talking about the game world. The interrelationship of all things should be remembered. Also remember in that change is a constant, even in fictional worlds. And this is where, as a GM, you should keep track of what's going on, not only what's going on with the players, but what's going on in the setting regardless of the players, to try to make the setting feel real, like a living, breathing thing that, stuff's going on. If the characters sleep in one day, the world is still going on and doing things in the background. Talks about gods, cosmos, fact and fiction, what some cultures might believe versus what's actually true, things like that. And if you're making a world from the top down, that's something you could, just state right from the get-go. It's like, okay, there's no gods in this setting, but these effects are in the setting and people associate those with gods. Or vice versa. Maybe there's gods in the setting and no one really believes in them, but they follow the trends, and they give them different sorts of names, different notations, and they just call them something else. So these are all things you can think about when you're making your own setting. Deciding the layout of the setting and how the mountains are formed, where they're formed, what kind of rainfall and climate, how that gets affected by landforms, and it goes into a lot of geological reasoning in this book, and I think it's kind of cool. You can just grab a map and just start drawing, where mountains and lakes and everything are, but if you think about it a little bit more in depth, you can really come up with some cool, like, real-world examples for how stuff works, why these things happen, why these things don't happen. But again, you can always just throw magic into it, and that's the reason why. That's what's nice about making your own setting. Talks about the placement of minerals and special, like, magical property, items and materials. Talks about plants, animals, the races, how to possibly plant those on the map. It says in here that monsters tend to be natural creatures that are manipulated or affected by some secondary source, such as magic, a magic user, some sort of intelligent designer, dabbler, geneticist. I don't know what kind of setting you're running. But that they start out normal and they get twisted. So that's an idea to think about if you are stuck coming up with a new monster. Just take a real world creature and add some things to it, make it a little bit bigger, and see what happens. Talks a lot about topography generation, and a lot of this stuff can be done randomly as well, which is nice if you're not really sure what's going on. And it's going to be like hex based in this book. Also, there's a hexographer website that I'll put a link to in the bottom that has a little bit of information regarding how to make a random map, how to manipulate a map with hexes, and I'll put a link down below. There's a section on climate and weather talking about the temperature curves, prevailing winds, polar and equatorial wind patterns, weather fronts, moderating forces, coastal winds, and barrier influences. So there's lots of detail when it comes to this kind of stuff. There's random weather patterns that are set up. Basically, most of these charts and so forth have a roughly like Earth assumptions, and then they go through and talk about the temperatures in the year, effects of terrain, precipitation changes, duration. A lot of these charts I think can be used in any RPG. Just if you have an idea like, okay, I want the possibility of weather to be random. You just have this like random chart ready, and whenever you want to roll on, you can feel free to do that. Or if you want to do it prep work style, you could do it beforehand. You could figure out the weather for the next year in your campaign, and then you just kind of follow along and see what it says. So I thought that was kind of interesting. There's suggestions on different difficulties like spot checks or awareness checks in Rolemaster, but you could use that in any system. Talks about cultures and races, such as what might make them different, things like unusual settlements, migration, adaptation, if the race is dormant when the environment is not suited to them, if a species migrates to locations during different seasons, can a species survive somewhere but is not yet adapted to it yet. Talks about body types and coloration, and basically how to look at cultures in a different way. Try to visualize their way of life, intercultural interaction, so how the different cultures interact with each other, cultural motivations and mannerisms for PCs and NPCs, and it just goes through lots of detail for basically everything that I'm talking about. This book really isn't a very thick book, but it's very dense with information. It's roughly probably about 175 pages worth of material, and yeah, it's just chock full of stuff. Talks about resources, thought patterns, history, technology levels, all kinds of information. Alright, so I'm going to skip over that because that could be a video in and of itself. It talks about different sequences of time, how there's like the world activity, strategic activity, and tactical activity. Like the world activity is basically, there's a lot more in-game time, but in real time it goes very quickly, so you hit the fast forward button in the game. Strategic time is basically sort of in between, and tactical time is when you're doing combats, and real life game turns take a lot longer than when it actually happens in game. There's a huge sequence of events and charts for events that happen in the game, and these are simply awesome. These could be adventure hooks, campaign hooks, they could really be anything. It goes by yearly, monthly, and weekly events, and they're listed in very great detail. There's 4 pages of them. Most of the descriptions allow for random rules, but you can just go through and pick the ones you think are interesting. But like I said, it's a very cool section. If you're really having writer's block, this is the kind of stuff you need to kind of jar your inspiration. You're like, oh wow, intrigue. The king is dead. Someone killed him. And there's like a trial going on in the background or something. Or bandits show up, or a new race appears on the horizon. Things like that. I think that's a great resource for campaign prep. Like I said about the random weather pattern generations, I think that's really interesting. I mean, sure, you can just say it rains or it's like this, but it goes into a lot more detail than I would be able to just on the fly. It has a lot of different types of weather. What I wanted to say about the weather is that I think that would make the setting feel more realistic, that the adventure would be more realistic as well. basically, this book is full of interesting suggestions, interesting ways of looking at the hobby, things that I've never heard discussed before in any other GM book. And we were talking about just having inspiration. There's a lot of things in here that can give a GM with writer's block inspiration. And as you're looking at all these pictures, some of the pictures themselves are interesting, and they kind of suggest stories in and of themselves. Sorry for my camera work. It's a little fuzzy in places, but I tried to incorporate some of the better pieces of art that I thought were interesting. It is all black and white. It's definitely not color. The only thing that's in color is the cover of the book. But overall, I think any GM would be well worth their time and effort to pick up this book. Listen, some of the downsides, it's Rolemaster. Rolemaster isn't very popular. It's a D100 plus modifier system. But again, I just think it's a great book, and I'm glad it's on my bookshelf. All right, everyone, thanks for sticking with me, and thanks for sticking in this long and listen to me ramble about a game book that came out in the 90s. All right, talk to you guys later.